Bam.
This is Ed Kressy, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
That's right. We met because we both know Jay Mohr, and we both have an affinity for Jay. We both want to try to help people. We both have a passion for trying to figure out prison, right? And it's such a complex thing. Like, I'll talk to a lot of people who have like the answer, like, here's the answer. And I'm like, oh boy, have you underestimated how hard this whole thing is? And we also both know, I'll help you out. His name is the guy who has the charity where he puts former inmates into jobs. He's the
Branson, Richard.
yes,
Bronson.
yes,
Richard
yes,
Bronson.
yes, yeah. Richard Bronson, who's a friend and a great asset to all of us because he tries to crack this thing too. Because there's a hey, you just one of the guys So when I was doing the interviews for the Prison Chronicles, one of the guys was like, you've been in prison, you've done all these things, you've healed a lot of your trauma, you've dealt with the horrible thing that you've done that got you there in the first place, you've moved past the denial, all these things, you've got yourself a GED, maybe became a certified some kind of technician of some kind of thing, and then they close that door and you're free, and you're like, oh my God. It's all on me now, and so it becomes like the greatest day and the most terrifying day of your life. And we lose sight of that. We think it just becomes easy peasy once you get out, but it only just begins as someone steps out of prison. Thanks for coming on the show, Ed. I appreciate it. That's how we're going to open this thing.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, it's so true what you say. One of the biggest obstacles we found to successful reentry is the stigma. I think a lot of times if you dismantle stigma, if you eliminate stigma, then you can also eliminate a lot of barriers to successful reentry following incarceration. Not all barriers, right. But once we overcome that stigma, it opens up a lot of opportunities for employment, for housing, for recovery from substance abuse. These things are high correlates to recidivism. The stigma is a big obstacle.
Correlates. I love it. One of the other issues is proximity to dipshits. Some people are at different levels of their ability to stay out of prison. And a lot of times you're cohabitated with them as you try to half-house your way out of this thing. And I'm saying half-house, whatever that program is that case manages you from prison to on your own. There's a lot of people on there who are not hell-bent, but they just cannot figure out how to get out of the way. And it's easy to get swept up in that because even if you've done nothing wrong, it's just there is that perception, there is that stigma. And it's like, hey, all of you guys did this thing. So now you all have this strike against you, or now you're all going back.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a hard road. What we found in particular is that entrepreneurism and employment, especially entrepreneurism, I started getting involved in the criminal justice reform space back in 2014. I was involved with a great nonprofit and later on a for-profit that went into prisons, including maximum security facilities such as Pelican Bay, High Desert out in California. They worked elsewhere throughout the country. What they found was that when it comes to entrepreneurism, a customer of an entrepreneur cares more so about who the person is today. Whereas when it comes to employment, oftentimes the employers look at past history as an indicator of future performance.
Yeah.
We teach these nonprofits taught, and they still teach entrepreneurism skills. We found that a lot of incarcerated people already have skills for becoming successful entrepreneurs. They just entered into fields that are illegal or not legitimate forms of entrepreneurism. They have skills for marketing, product development, sales, distribution, customer service. They already have these skills. When we transfer them to a legitimate business, then they often succeed. And once we can overcome that barrier to earning a legitimate income, then we can overcome additional barriers. It's a tough situation, as you so point out, that when we're put in situations where we're in close proximity to people who aren't necessarily on the same pathways that we're on, who are dragging us down either consciously or just by virtue of what their situation is in life. These are tough obstacles to overcome. But fortunately, Pete, we have individuals such as yourself, such as Jay Mohr, such as many, many others who are dedicated to
Yeah.
reforming criminal justice and providing opportunities.
There's on the happy, dreamy side, there is this belief that this is a solvable problem. Then you get in there and you realize just how challenging this is. Like, you have to punish people who do bad things. Now, you don't have to punish all of them in the same way, but if we don't incarcerate people who need incarceration, then the state can't provide security for people who are not part of the problem. And so we have this erosion of perception of security. And here's the thing I learned in all of my travels in the war zones. That perception of instability is critical, because if you can't, it's always bigger than the actual threat. Like, you and I can go walk around Oakland right now, and without knowing which neighborhood to be in, we're going to be fine. If you know what neighborhoods not to be in, probably be fine. But that belief that there is something dangerous out there is Oakland's reputation, and it will be for the foreseeable future, right? And so, is Oakland a dangerous place, or is it dangerous in this? Like, there's certainly parts of Oakland where if you need help, it's not coming. There are certainly parts of Oakland where if you need help, not a problem at all. It's right there. So we have this perception problem in terms of what crime looks like, and when we try to deal with crime and try to hold people accountable, we struggle with that on the magical hippy dippy side. On the totalitarian side, we're like, you look like you might have committed a crime. We're going to go ahead and throw you in jail, and we're going to punish you. And every time we see you, we're going to look down upon you and never let you up from this minor offense, so that you become further and further ensnared and enmeshed into the system that will never stop looking down and chewing up your soul.
It's a challenging problem. You know, from my perspective, speaking for myself, and this is only my story, I committed hundreds of felonies when I was actively addicted to booze, coke, meth, other substances. I only got busted for one, only one felony arrest. I used to think, and this is embarrassing to say, but it's the truth. I used to think that I was a better criminal. You know, I make better decisions. That's why I never got busted, except for the one time. But the truth is, when I started to meet incarcerated people, when I started to go to places like Pelican Bay and High Desert State Prison,
Yeah.
I learned, or they taught me, incarcerated people taught me, that my decision making had nothing to do with it. The reason I only got busted for that one felony was because, and this is my story only, I got unfair advantages from society. And let's face it, these unfair advantages came to me because of my skin color. I'm white, because I'm male, and because I'm from a relatively privileged socioeconomic background. And again, this is only my story. It doesn't mean that I feel everyone who looks like me from a similar background is the same. But for me, the unfair advantages I received from society, those are the reasons that I was able to get away with as many felonies as I did until I finally got busted. When you talk about it's such a challenging problem, and I appreciate the way you framed it, when it comes to eliminating the incarceration crisis or addressing the incarceration crisis, what you're about to hear from me may reveal my own naivety more than anything else. But it seems to me, in a lot of ways, we can eliminate the incarceration crisis by eliminating crime. Now, realistically, we can't ever eliminate 100% of crime. But what we can do is do two things. We can provide, number one, educational opportunities, and number two, opportunities to recover from substance abuse. I had the one opportunity. I had a lot of educational opportunities, but I didn't take advantage of recovery. Recovery was always there for me. I could have overcome my addiction much sooner than I did, but I didn't have the discipline. I didn't have the belief in myself to take advantage of recovery. I feel that if we can offer viable alternatives to committing crimes, those viable alternatives are education and recovery from substance abuse, or at least two major alternatives. If we can provide those opportunities to everyone, not just someone like me who has privileges, or I believe has privileges, a lot of people don't, we can provide education and recovery opportunities. I think we can take a major step towards cutting down, eliminating crime. You're always going to have people that suffer from mental health challenges, other challenges. That's a way we can really address the incarceration crisis. As you're aware, we spend $80 billion in the United States a year on
Yeah.
incarceration, and it does take into account the tremendous toll on human lives, on
Yeah.
families, on communities. $80 billion is enough to pay the salary of every school teacher in America.
Yeah.
$80 billion is enough to pay the tuition of every student enrolled in a public university or college in America. It's a tremendous burden on American taxpayers. Incarceration is a tremendous burden on taxpayers, a
Yeah.
tremendous burden on families and communities. And again, Pete, I'm grateful for you and Jay Mohr and for Scott Huesing and Richard
Yeah.
Bronson and so many others, and for the chance to talk to you about these challenges.
It is hard, and we tend to put all these people in the same bucket. And so the person who has addiction and is on that path, whatever that path is it 2 years? Is it one time? Is it 25 years? I mean, you look at someone like Sly Stone. He did drugs his whole life. He only recently, in the last few years, as far as I know, got off and stayed off drugs, right? He was smoking crack in his 70s. So you don't know how long that path is, and you know the numbers on recovery and getting away from that stuff and staying away. It is enormously hard to do. And then you take the person who's got some kind of personality disorder, pick whichever one you want, and it's completely unfettered, unchecked at all, and we'll just say it's schizophrenia, right? And that person's in the streets, can't live in a house, family won't take them in anymore, they've burned all those bridges, now they're on the street, and what are they going to do to survive? Whatever they have to. And so you have all of the undiagnosed bipolar, I mean, all of these things that go to that. And then you just have folks that end up on a path one step at a time. No one starts out saying, hey, I want to be a murderous gangster who doesn't give a damn about society, because society doesn't give a damn about me. But slowly over time, you're taught that lesson. And a lot of people have that lesson. If you grow up with not enough, or if you grow up with too much abuse or abandonment or whatever it is, you learn to fend for yourself, and you learn to set your own rules. And your rules are, at least at best, extra legal, if not completely illegal, right? And so we put all these people, boom, boom. Oh, then you have, I had a bad night, worst night of my life, I've done a horrible thing, and I definitely need to be punished. I belong here. And now you look, and like, there's Maniac 1, there's Gang Member 2, and you're like, all I really wanted to do was, I don't want to crew up. I did a bad thing. And so we have these people too who got drunk, drove, killed somebody. They need punishment. They need to go there, but they're in the same place as all of these other problems, right? And so how do you allow someone, whatever category they're in, how do you allow them to do their time, whatever that means, right? And we're not very good at sorting that out at all.
We're often not very good. It's so true. You mentioned mental health challenges. I was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, which may have come from my 11 years of addiction to methamphetamine, or maybe it was something that was there before. But I started drinking heavily and becoming addicted to drugs when I was 16. So it's hard to tell where the mental health challenges began and the addiction ended, or vice versa.
Yeah.
I have a lot of advantages. I have opportunities. I could see a therapist. I have a health plan through the state of Massachusetts. I have a car, so I can get to appointments if I need to. I feel, having gone to places, having gone into maximum security prisons and met a lot of people who are incarcerated, I've worked closely with people who have been labeled the very worst of the very worst. These are the labels society has put on these people. They've been convicted of violent crimes, murder in many cases. They're validated gang members. I don't think you would really be in a place like Pelican Bay or High Desert if you were not a validated gang member. So these guys came up through the Crips, the Bloods, the Aryan Brotherhood. They are the most beautiful human beings I've ever met. Many of them.
Yeah.
Not for the things they've done. And this is not to condone the actions people like me have taken that resulted in harm to others. But as these incarcerated men and women that I've worked with tell me their stories, they grew up in situations such as they're 9 years old, they open the front door to their home, their neighbor is bleeding to death from stab wounds on their front porch. This is a 9-year-old kid. They go out to the store for some milk or whatever. Again, they're 9, 10, 11 years old, however old, younger maybe. They're surrounded by the street gang. The street gang says, this kid, you know, you're 8, 9, 10 years old, whatever. The street gang says, you can join the gang right now. You don't have to, but if you don't, you're going to get stomped right now. I'll tell you, if I had been offered that choice as a little kid, or if I'd been presented with that situation, would I have had the strength not to join a gang? No, I don't think so. Speaking for myself, the people I've met, the persons I've met who were involved in the gangs, very few people, at least that I've met, joined a gang in order to commit crimes or to sell drugs. People join gangs, at least the people I've met, they join gangs for safety, for community, for feelings of belonging, for a sense of family. These are things we all want. These are legitimate human needs and desires. Unfortunately, they got into gang life. Yet, from my experience, if we provide them opportunities for education, for entrepreneurism, for recovery from substance abuse, they have the potential to do that. There's very few people I've worked with who I thought, incarcerated people I've worked directly with, very few I've worked with who I haven't thought, you know, if they were offered the same opportunities as me, they would have come out fine. They would have come out fine.
It's you know, the Prison Chronicles taught me a lot about all of this stuff. And again, I continue to hit the ball back to you gently because you know so much about this day-to-day interactions. But yeah, I had this person who worked for a nonprofit who went into San Quentin, and she said the most well-adjusted people. She's like, and I've worked at all kinds of places, especially startups. The most well-adjusted people are these murderers because they've been forced to go through all of the therapy. And as a norm, and again, it's a tiny sample size, but I think this holds. These people that had 3 strikes, or they had committed murder, or they'd done enough to stay in prison they didn't know if they would ever get out, right? These are significant criminals. To a person basically said, you know, it took me 11 years to figure out why I was there and accept that it was my fault. Maybe I didn't do that crime. And there's a guy that we had on. He was a rapper the entire time he was in. He made a bunch of money and everything else. And his name is Andre Vachon. And he didn't do the murder, but he walked into the house with his gang members and they harmed somebody. And he's like, we shot the wrong person and it wasn't my fault, but I was there and I was there to do harm to somebody. You know, it was the kid, not the mom. The mom got killed instead. And it took me a long time to get over that. For all of the getting overs, personally, emotionally, also accepting that I hold responsibility, that woman is not around. I've damaged that family. And that took him, you know, about 11 years. And then he got to work. And he had to go probably another 10 years, 15 years. And most of these guys were like, yeah. And then that last time that I went through my parole hearing, I was ready. I was truly ready at that point to get out. And that's when I got out. But before that, no, I was still mad. I still had work to do. And so when you hear like these stories from these guys who are openly admitting, you know, no matter what, the decisions I was making, even if I got into a fight that resulted in somebody dying, I was drinking, I was doing drugs, I was looking for fights. I was creating this environment where someone died and it would have happened one way or the other. I was drinking and driving, you know, all of these things, they were happening. And so there is that road that we put ourselves on when we're young, whatever it is, and we are a product of our environment.
We're a product of our environment. I love a couple of things that you said. I love how you used a couple of terms. You said a person convicted of murder, or something like that. Mm-hmm. I think when we get away from the labeling type of language, which I myself have been very guilty of, when we get away from terms like inmate, convict, prisoner, right. When we use terms like incarcerated person or person with a criminal history, or just like you said, person who's been convicted of murder, when we remember these are people who have certainly made some bad decisions, tragic decisions, right. In many cases, when we start shifting our labels, then we can really create, we can go a long ways towards creating empathy. And that was another thing that I really liked about what you said is the idea of empathy. When persons right. like the gentleman you mentioned, and I remember your show about that, Andre, was his name?
I said Andre Vachon is his name.
Honore. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I remember that episode of your show, and it's the word inspiring gets thrown around a lot, but truly,
Right.
for someone to have made a mistake of that nature, to have done something which resulted in the loss of a life, and then to have that degree of self-reflection, of accepting his own mistakes, that's a huge thing to offer the rest of us. That's an amazing way to show the power of empathy, the power of forgiveness. Honore, I would imagine, has learned to forgive himself, at least to some degree. One of my favorite quotes is from Gandhi. And Gandhi says, "Forgiveness is not for the weak. Only the strong can forgive." Those are the words of Gandhi. And, who better to teach us than incarcerated people who have learned to forgive themselves, and especially victims, the victims of crimes who have learned, or the families of victims who have learned to forgive. These are powerful, transformative concepts that I think have the potential to help all of society.
Yeah. Honore tells this great story. He had gone through his parole hearing, everything's granted, and he's going to be released on, we'll say 10 July today, right? And he's in San Diego, and it's release day. He's just waiting for them to process his paperwork and kick him out. And his family's down there waiting to see him, waiting to see that gate open. And they wanted to get him one last time. He's like, they wanted to test me one last time. And they're like, nope, we're going to put this free man in shackles, in a jumpsuit, in the back of a truck, unair conditioned, and extradite him up to Oakland or Sacramento, wherever it was that he started, and release him up there. And it's just like that, and that's not a short ride in the back of a truck, shackled and everything. It's just not. And he had to do that very long, excruciating ride, and had to swallow it, because forgiveness is not for the weak. It is not for the weak. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
If I could, I would like on a little bit of a tangent, but
please.
Thank you. In my experience, in my through the course of my personal story and what I've seen elsewhere, I just want to say a few words of gratitude towards law enforcement and corrections, especially in my case, the FBI. People in the FBI helped me a lot. People in the police department and people in corrections. Now, by no means am I coming here saying that we should give a blanket endorsement to all things law enforcement. No way. We do not condone that we know tragic things happen. Tragic actions are taken in the name of law enforcement every day, multiple times a day. Yet I've seen the power of people in law enforcement and incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people to come together. In my own life, when I was actively addicted to meth, I believed in these FBI conspiracy theories. In my case, they weren't theories; they were ironclad beliefs. In my mind, I was out there. I believed the FBI had architected a vast 9/11 conspiracy targeting me personally, and had involved all my family, my former friends, former employers. I was tearing apart my drywall, looking for hidden cameras and microphones, hearing disembodied voices threatening to kidnap and torture me to death.
Right.
I blamed it all on the FBI. And these were beliefs. I didn't just think it was the FBI after me. I believed it. As much as I believe that you and I are sitting right here today, Pete. Yet, when I got clean off meth, the FBI gave me a second chance. They allowed me to participate in their Citizens Academy, which is a series of classes where community members like myself could learn about the FBI and go out and become ambassadors between our communities and the FBI. In my case, I looked at it as a way to help the FBI do a better job of serving communities affected by incarceration. Hopefully, I've been able to accomplish that. I believe the FBI, as do many of us, have a lot further to go when it comes to supporting communities affected by incarceration. But I'm very grateful to the FBI. And the same goes for many police officers and police departments I've had the good fortune to work with, who are truly engaged in building bridges of trust between law enforcement and between communities affected by incarceration. The same goes for many people in corrections. I believe that if we're going to solve the incarceration crisis, we have to do it in partnership with law enforcement and corrections. It's like losing weight. If I want to lose weight, I have to consume less calories than I burn. It's a simple formula. If I want to lose weight, I got to burn more calories than I consume. It doesn't matter how I feel about calories. It doesn't matter whether I like to exercise. It's a simple fact. I feel it's very similar in that if we want to solve the incarceration crisis, we have to do it in partnership with law enforcement and corrections.
Yeah.
I'm very grateful to many people in the FBI, police departments, and veterans. I don't want to leave out veterans. I know, of course, the military is not strictly speaking law enforcement, but a lot of veterans and active people, a lot of veterans have shown a strong interest in helping incarcerated people. I believe that 7% of incarcerated people are veterans. A large percentage of those were honorably discharged. So as to why there's that a large population of incarcerated veterans, I'm not sure. I don't know if anybody is, but I'm grateful to the veterans community for the help for the service that they've provided to incarcerated people. There's a lot of good individuals, a lot of great individuals out there in the veteran community, law enforcement and corrections who are working towards a solution. And we're getting there. We're getting there slowly but surely.
There are a lot of good people working on this problem. And there's just a lot of damning problems inside of these problems that are individually hard to solve. I'll bring up one of them that was illustrated again through the Prison Chronicles, but proximity to help. If you want to have the most help in the nation, go to jail at San Quentin. It's got the most help. They're located with all these startups. These startups are like, hey, we'd love people that can code, among other things. And if you guys can work on this system, man, we'll hire you right now to work on code in a closed environment. We'll take that code out. We'll pay you fair money for it. You can't have that money right now because you're in the prison system, but it'll be sitting there. I'm like, oh my God, you can do all these things, right? But if you're in Marysville, up in the desert where you have to leave California to go to Nevada to circle back in to get into it, man, you are nowhere near big time real help like San Quentin has. And so we have this disparity of where the help is. And the other thing that I wanted to bring in, like with this problem set of dealing with these things, because you talked about, the prison system, the police, all of these things. The court system has got to get better. I've caught myself ensnared in a couple of things. There was like a paperwork error that happened to me in Illinois, and they thought that I didn't have insurance. I had insurance the whole time. The entire time I had insurance on my car, but they had flipped a switch somewhere, and these things happen. They flipped a switch and said, you don't have insurance, so your license is suspended. And I'm like, whoa. I have to drive. And at the time, Illinois was into running your plate if they were behind you. So they had run my plate, suspended license, pull me over, tow my truck, throw me in jail until I can get out. And then I'm like, but I didn't do. And so at one point, this is crazy, Ed, I had a piece of paper that said, hey, your license and registration are good to go because you have insurance. Paragraph 2, keep in mind, because you don't have insurance, we are suspending your license and registration. It's in the same document. Like, how can that even happen, right? And so I get caught in this circle. And so the state, the police, and the courts couldn't talk to each other in a way that would be like, oh my gosh, this is not anybody's fault and nobody can fix this. I was supposed to drive 6 hours. A guy who can't drive is supposed to drive 6 hours down to Springfield on my day off that I don't have to go maybe talk to someone. Nobody knows who that person is to get this thing sorted out at the state. Everybody pointed to somebody else to fix this problem. One county, the court, the judge is like, you've been in here a lot. And I'm like, I have. She's like, what's going on? And I'm like, I'm in this paperwork thing. I've not done anything wrong. I have insurance on my car, but it keeps looking like I keep getting pulled over. But I have insurance, and I keep getting pulled over before I can get this thing rectified. I keep in mind, within this, I'm a Turner. So anybody with a lawyer, anybody with an interpreter, then we go to the A's, then the lawyers come back, and then the interpreter cases come back, and then we go to the J's and the K's. By the time they get to me, everyone has had it. There is no grace left. They're pissed. And so the other county next door where I lived, those guys treated me like I was a criminal. And they were like raising my bail every time I would get arrested for this stuff over and over again. I'm like, I still have to work. I can't stop doing life. And so I had to get crafty about driving. And without even being a criminal, I was getting pulled into this system. It got more and more expensive. I got pulled over. I came back from Iraq. I was working in Iraq, and I got pulled over because I didn't know where I was, and I made a left turn, and I ended up going the wrong way. I wasn't doing anything. I was just a dumb driving thing. It was late at night, no big deal, but I was in a bad neighborhood. And they're like, "Why are you here?" I'm like, "I'm just getting back. I rented a car to go to my friend's house." Told them all the truth. And they're like, "Yeah, why are you really out here?" And I'm like, "Oh, I guess this is a bad neighborhood. No idea. I'm just trying to get back from Midway. Midway's not in the best neighborhood." And so they took me into jail because I had these warrants. And I'm like, I can't believe I work in Iraq and I just got thrown in jail over this same stupid thing that I thought I had fixed. And so the next day, the whole time, the guys who run that part of the jail, so like the holding cell, it is freezing cold, by the way. It is so cold, and there's no blankets. There's just an iron bench, and I'm just shivering to death on it. These guys have like a butane stove, and they're all warm, and their jackets on and everything. They're like, "Don't worry, they're not going to extradite you out to that county that hates you because it's expensive and it makes no sense." Well, sure enough, they put me in that truck, and this is when my color of my skin didn't work in my advantage. That guy's got money, and they sent me out, and they put me in court, and they treated me like I was this horrible person. And so the DA, who would never talk to me, finally sat down and talked to me. And he's like, "What's going on?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I've not done anything wrong. I don't even live here anymore. I'm really not a problem." And he's like, "Well, then how about we do this whole ridiculous, like jail time, suspended sentence?" I'm like, "Hey, you don't understand. I work in Iraq. I've got top secret orders in my pocket to carry classified information. You think I'm this bad person. Reality, I'm not. I'm not that person." And he's like, "Wait a second, show me your top secret order thing." And so I showed him this card that allows me to carry top secret information. I'm like, I am like, this would screw me up in a way that I can't even imagine. And there's no point. This is all about insurance. And the other county wiped it off. Can't we just make this whole thing go away? I mean, why am I being penalized so hard for this thing? And he thought about it. He's like, "Okay, yeah, we'll just wipe it out. You just pay court fees." And so I'm like, "Okay, fine." So I go in and, it's my turn, and the judge is pissed. Not because of me, just because I'm at the end of the line. And he's like, "Turner, come up here." He's like, "Okay, what's going on?" "Oh, okay, so we're going to wipe all the charges out, make everything's dismissed." "Okay, great. Court fees, $2,500. And I was like, and I had the money to pay it, so it was fine. And I was like, it's a bargain, right? But that is like it was so expensive. I had to leave the state because they couldn't stop arresting me over things that I hadn't even done. And so now imagine if you're any closer to being illegal than I was. And I'm just some guy working at a corporate job and struggling to survive working at a bar part-time. So I drive home in the middle of the night because I worked at a bar, and I was in the Army part-time too. So I got 3 jobs, and that wasn't good enough, And so I tell that long story because these things stack up on people real fast, and you get like a $1,200 or a $2,500 problem that you can't solve yourself. And you're like, well, what am I going to do? When am I going to have $2,500 in my pocket? Like legitimately, when can most of America say, yeah, $2,500? Yeah, I got that. Just sitting around. Like it's very, very rare that happens.
Yeah. It's, you mentioned there's this, when you talked about the alphabetical, they get to Turner and how they're their wits end from the way you described it. They've done studies where people get paroled when the parole hearing is after lunch versus first thing in the morning. One of the other as I recall the study, a statistically significant majority get paroled either in the morning or after lunch. There's
right.
All else, when they tease out any confounding variables or as many as they can, and they really analyze it, they say that the time of day when your parole hearing occurs has as much, if not more, to do with whether or not you get paroled than most other factors. I'm butchering the study a little bit, but they came to
but I witnessed it. I witnessed it all the time, and they would get to like the M's, and all the energy would run out, and then they would start cranking them out because they all want to be done. They don't want the docket to go over, and you still got the R's, and they're like, boom, hard ass, boom, hard ass, boom. They would just pump you out, but you wouldn't get the benefit. You would just get, here's what we're gonna do,
and you got to get to the S's.
So again. Yeah. And then you get to the poor W's. They're after me, and I'm fighting for myself. So I started that whole thing with proximity to help, which is a big thing. but also like reforming how the court sees people. You know, if it's hard on a police officer to go into the same shitty neighborhood over and over again, and they become jaded, they become hard, and you have to rotate them out for their own mental well-being, but also to allow a fresh face to come in and go, okay, you know, because it's hard to put someone. It's the same thing for DAs, assistant DAs, and judges who just deal with people who are, you know, look, they're not at their best. Nobody's shining bright when they're in court standing in front of a judge. And so it takes a lot of temperament to do your job without really knowing that much, and not put everybody in the same box and give them the same penalty when maybe a little bit more lenience, maybe something different, maybe just like get out of my courtroom and go do a different program. But the court doesn't have that ability. And I think that we put a lot of people in a situation where, oh, by the way, bail reform, I'm fine with having to post bail, but you shouldn't have these hyper aggressive, like 45% charges on top of the fee to post bail things. Like, no, let's just, you know, charge bail. That's fair. Here's the bail, $1,000. Okay. And there's a fair fee for that, you know, 5%, whatever it is. Not the stuff where it's like 2/3 of the cost of the bail sometimes. That's also crazy.
Yeah. You mentioned something interesting about San Quentin versus other correctional facilities and the availability of programming. We found it to be so true. One way that we're overcoming that with help from departments of corrections is Zoom and other online technologies are becoming more and more available in the correctional setting. Yeah, we do. When I say we, I'm talking about our nonprofit, Uncarcerated. We do Zoom. We're currently doing 4 recovery meetings a week in Maine and Arizona. I do all these meetings, all 4 meetings from my home in Massachusetts. We're able to Zoom in Arizona. They bring in 6 to 8 correctional facilities. We have up to 100, 115 incarcerated people who come to our Zoom meetings. We've had fantastic speakers like our common friend Jay Mohr. We've had Scott Huesing has been kind enough to speak for us. Josh Swindell, Tim Ryan, people who are Jennifer Jimenez, people who are real shining lights in the world of recovery and criminal justice reform. So we can bring these individuals into prison via Zoom in a way that you would be very difficult to do were it not for technology and were it not for departments of corrections like those in Arizona, like those in Maine and elsewhere that allow us these opportunities. The other challenges to delivering programming in prison are things like, you know, you can set up a great program, you can have a fantastic speaker or instructor or volunteer or whomever. You show up, you drive, you know, potentially hours out on the I-5 or wherever.
Oh my gosh.
California,
I know what you're going to say.
Yeah, you've been on the I-5. And then you show up and there's the prison, the facility is under lockdown. And then you got to turn around and go home. With Zoom, it still happens, but it's the investment is much less. You know,
the cost is way less. Yeah,
the cost is much less, and in a state like Arizona, where they're able to Zoom in multiple prisons, not all prisons hopefully are going to be on lockdown at once, so you still have your Zoom meeting. And unfortunately, the incarcerated residents of one facility aren't able to join if there's a lockdown, but you're still able to deliver value to the other incarcerated residents. So Zoom, states like departments of corrections like those in Maine, Arizona, other places, I believe Oregon, but I'm not too familiar with other states, only because Uncarcerated is mostly in Maine and Arizona. The access to technology in the incarcerated population is making it much easier for nonprofits and volunteers to deliver programming and the for-profit programmers. And I believe, and what I found is that when we can deliver educational opportunities, when we can deliver opportunities to overcome substance abuse, like what we were talking about earlier, provide education, provide viable forms of recovery. Those are 2 solid ways to cut down on recidivism and offer legitimate opportunities to committing crimes.
Yeah. I want to go back to the court thing real quick, because part of you know what happens is the court systems aren't always familiar with veteran diversion, in that we have the ability to get into, you know, basically it's a funnel to get you over to the VA, because we're so hard to get us to do things, and so diversion helps, but the court has to be willing to do that. The DA in one of my cases, I got a little too drunk one night, And he's like, no, throwing the book at him. And it's like, you don't get to. You don't get to. You don't get to decide that. Like this is not in your hands anymore. And the guy was pissed. He stalled and stalled and stalled and stalled and drew this thing out, had it hanging over my head. Like these things in the court are fixable. Like why would you do that? And whatever. Look, but that got me into the VA system, got me more help, and I did become more stable. Would I have done anything crazy? I don't know, maybe, but probably, I don't know, who knows? But I got the help that I needed and still need, and I'm a lot more stable now because of it, right? And so I think veteran diversion worked, but the courts have to be ready to say, hey, you're a veteran. We're just going to take you and push you right over into that system because that's where you belong. But they, a lot of them struggle with that. And when I was going through that case, at the end of it, I said to the judge, and I'm like, the whole time, veteran diversion, there's not a veteran diversion rep in here. And there should have been the entire time. And she's like, well, do you want to go through the process again? Like threatening me? And I'm like, no, this is the chance for you to say, you know what, we're going to do better next time. But it wasn't about that. She held her judginess over me. And I'm like, no, it's fine. But I watched people. And again, this goes back to the court thing. I watched people because, again, I'm a TUR, right? I watch all of them. And I watch this guy go up there and like, you violated parole. And I'm like, the guy says, but I wasn't on parole. You told me I wasn't on parole. I have the piece of paper here. It says I wasn't on parole. And she said, well, I told you to call your parole officer. It's like, I can't call a parole officer if I'm not on parole. I tried. They didn't take the call. They didn't call me back because you know why? I wasn't on parole. But now you see I violated my parole. How do these two things go together? I watched her do that. And so when I went through, I knew to play the game. And I'm like, hey, you told me to do the same thing. And I'm like, but am I on parole? On the record, am I on parole? No, you're not. But you want me to call the parole officer? Yes. So I make sure I copied everything. I had everything laid out because I didn't want any fuckery. I don't trust any of them because I watched them screw people's lives up. And this is the court aspect of this too, right? So every little station has its problem where if you're not on top of it, if you don't have someone to case manage you and say, no, not only make copies, give me copies, because when someone goes and screws you, I'm going to be here to make sure you have a copy of that piece of paper. Because if not for a piece of paper and someone says, no, you violated this term, it's like, no, I have this piece of paper right here, evidence of it, then they'll look at it, maybe, right? But that isn't what the court system is supposed to be about. It's not supposed to be about how do we put you in jail. It's supposed to be like, hey, you're innocent until proven guilty. And then you said that you forced me to plead to something. All right, fine. And now you're going to get me anyhow? Come on.
Yeah. Well, so, stories like yours need to be told because not only are you law abiding, you always were, but, despite the glitches in the court system and what happened, not only are you out, not only are you paying taxes, and I'm assuming you're paying taxes, obeying the law, but you do it as valuable as those are to society, but you're also carrying the message of criminal justice reform via the Prison Chronicles and via the other work that you're doing. So it's so important for a story like yours that you transformed, you're transforming the lives of others. You're giving people like Shaka Senghor, like Honore, like Kenyatta Leal, who there's, I think, another friend in common. Kenyatta actually got me into this type of work in the first place. He was one of the first people I
Isn't that crazy?
It is. I would, I would do, after I got clean in 2007, put my addiction and criminal activity behind me. I started telling my story in 12-step meetings, which is extremely helpful. Then what I did was I found a Toastmasters community. And Toastmasters, for those who may not be familiar, is a public speaking and leadership organization. Now, public speaking terrified me, man. I was, as many of us are, I was terrified of public speaking, but I knew after I got clean off drugs, I knew if I really wanted to not only stay sober and not only stay clean, as important as those things are, but I wanted to live my best life. I wanted to live a life of service. I wanted to wake up every morning excited about life, feeling that I was contributing. I knew if that vision for myself was going to come true, I had to overcome my fears. I had to, because I was a very fearful person going back to when I was a bullied youth, afraid to stand up to myself, and through most of my adult life, pumping myself up with alcohol and drugs. Fear dominated my life. Fear dominated my decisions. I knew I had to overcome that fear when I put drugs and criminal activity behind me. Fear of the FBI and of law enforcement, that was a big one. We talked about that. And fear of public speaking. So I joined
Yeah.
Toastmasters. In order to do that, I learned how to be. I never got to a point of feeling the 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 nervousness that never entirely left me in all situations. But what happened with Toastmasters was I learned not only could I get up in front of a room and deliver a little talk, but I could also tell my story of
Mm,
having overcome addiction and overcome brief incarceration and overcome a life bouncing around, doing stints in homeless shelters and the psych
right.
ward and
Yeah.
jail cells. I could share that story with others outside of the 12-step community. That was a very powerful way for me to say, here's my past, 20 years of mistakes and poor choices and criminal activity. I can take that 20 years and I can make something worthwhile out of it. I
Yeah.
can use it to bring value to the world around me. Stories like that, stories like mine, and mine is one tiny, tiny story, especially when you
Right.
look at people again like Shaka Senghor and Kenyatta Leal and my good friends Tim Ryan and Josh Swindell, who overcame
Yeah.
incarceration and addiction. These are stories that I feel people need to hear because it
Yeah.
goes back to that idea of empathy. We can see what makes us similar. We can have empathy towards people who, like me, made mistakes, yet turned our lives around. And when we create that empathy, when we create that forgiveness, again, forgiveness is not for the weak. Forgiveness is only for the strong. When I learn
No.
to forgive, it's because I want to be a strong person.
The other end of that, the big end of that is charity. Not supposed to be easy. You're supposed to be head down, sweating like, I don't know how we're going to pull this off, right? It's because all the easy problems, they get solved. That's the impossible ones. And so when we illustrate these things and we tell these stories, it's hard. I mean, the fact is the big number for addiction is you walk up to 100 people, you try to get them to not be addicts, you're failing more than 9 times out of 10. And so you could want something, but it's tough. I had a guy on. We talked about homelessness. I think actually was on his show, and he's in New York, and he was talking about it and everything. And I said, "Well, what's the longitudinal success?" It's like, "Oh, we don't study that." And I'm like, yeah, yeah, because then the program looks like it doesn't work, because it's really hard to get someone off the streets to believe in themselves, to believe in other people. Holy shit. Wow. To deal with their issues, whether they're something that they can tackle with medicine or therapy or a combination. These are not gentle topics. And to go into that world, as you know, and reliably pull someone out addicted to meth, addicted to drugs in general, the abuse that they take along the way to feed their addiction. It's not just one wound that you're trying to deal with. And I always say this, and I know you'll appreciate this. If you could see the wounds on an addicted person, like if they presented like an open sore on their back or a broken arm, you would treat them differently because they're horribly, horribly, horribly damaged. And prison isn't the place for these people. It's just it makes me laugh. It's so patently absurd. So there might be some prison time later, but we have to deal with the fact that these folks are medically damaged. And we don't look at it that way, at least not often enough and not in enough places.
Absolutely. Well, there you go. There's the empathy. There's the forgiveness. I was only homeless for a very brief while, maybe a couple of weeks, but it was one of the worst times of my life. It was better than jail homelessness was, but not much. Not much better.
Yeah.
The challenges. I was actively addicted at the time, and the challenges of just making it through the day, just getting a shower, food, a relative
Hmm.
degree of safety, mental health, addressing mental health challenges, just to deal with all of that and much more. The room that's left to get a job interview or create a resume or work on
Yeah.
housing,
Yeah.
very, very challenging. Yeah, homelessness is extremely difficult. As obvious as that might be to say, homelessness is very, very difficult. And I was only homeless for a brief while, and I
Yeah.
again had a lot of opportunities that most people don't have.
If you're homeless, the second question, wherever you go, job, aid, anything, what's your name? Where do you live? And you're like, oh, I don't live anywhere. I don't get mail anywhere, and you're like, well, how do we communicate with you? And so you're already extra legal because you don't have a damned place to live, and all of these things takes that extra step. that we're learning to try to make better. But man, it's tough. The When I want to ask about the addiction side of this thing, because I know we've talked about this off mic. There's 12 steps. There's all kinds of things. The medical community's really rocketed forward, and I'll just say the words Ozempic because it does tamp down urges in some ways. And so we're getting better at that side of it. The drugs that make you just not crave things, turning off the alcohol craving, like we're getting better at all this. What do you see in the future for dealing with addiction beyond just 12 steps? I'm not saying anything bad about 12 steps because it's around for a long time because it works, but it doesn't work for everybody, right? So how do we get people into the cone of like, here are all the ways to deal with addiction, and how do we take that 90+% failure rate? How do we crack that out by 2 or 3% and reliably get it to say, oh, I don't know, 86 would be a blessing to get it to there even.
It would. It's a challenging problem. I don't know. I don't know the answer. The 12 steps, I have a little bit of experience with psychedelics, which psychedelics is therapy for addiction, which I don't recommend to everyone, but I did get value from psychedelics. Yet since 2007, when I put the meth pipe away for good, along with the other stuff, the coke, the booze, or the alcoholically drinking, almost all my experiences in the 12-step program. I think for me and maybe for others, the challenge is, getting sober, quitting drugs. It's not easy, but it's the easy part. When I was between the ages of 16 and 37, I quit drugs 1,000 times, 10,000 times. Every Monday morning that rolled around, man, I quit drugs. I remember I lived in this apartment for a while that had it had one of those little, when you're on like an upper floor and you have the trash and you can open a little trash chute. It's like a, lever door or whatever, and you throw your trash and it plunges down into the basement, into a trash. So every, Sunday night, I would pack up my cigarettes and I would stuff, and all my paraphernalia. And if I had a glass pipe, I would break it. I would throw it all down the trash chute, every Sunday night, because I was going to quit doing drugs. And every following Thursday or Friday, I was back at it, because quitting drugs was not the thing with addiction that I found, and maybe others have found, is that addiction is drugs for an addicted person like myself. Drugs are not the problem. Drugs are our attempt at a solution. No, my problem was me. My problem is that I was always the bullied kid, afraid to stand up for himself on the schoolyard, the kid who couldn't fit in, the kid who just couldn't, the kid who was laughed at school. I was always the person, the kid who I felt others didn't like. And I internalized those perceptions and hated myself. I was a person who had these negative, judgmental thoughts about myself, and I projected them onto the world around me. So drugs were my solution. I could hit that pipe, I could do a line, I could get drunk or whatever. And that I never got high because I wanted to be a high version of myself. I wanted to get high enough to become someone completely different. But there aren't enough drugs in the world to be a whole different person. The best that I could do was kill my old self. I wasn't consciously trying to kill my old self, but that's really what I was doing. So when I quit drugs, every Sunday night at that trash chute with the paraphernalia going down into the basement trash bin, I was throwing away my solution. And when Monday morning rolled around with no more solution, I stayed quit from drugs. But like we were talking about earlier, that's only part of the challenge. The challenge, at least for me, and I was taught, how do I live my best life? How do I become the best version of myself? And that, Pete, is where the 12 steps became so important. The 12 steps showed me a spiritual path, a path of believing in spiritual principles of service to others, principles of self-improvement, principles of spirituality. So these principles, this spiritual path, is available outside of the 12 steps. Absolutely it is. What I've learned for myself and what I've learned from others like Jay Mohr and like so many others I've had the good fortune to meet on my journey is that, there's got to be a spiritual basis. For me, I'm not saying this has to be true for everybody, but when we're in recovery and we're overcoming a devastating addiction like mine, and we're overcoming poor choices like the many poor choices I made, there's got to be a new solution. There's got to be a new solution. And that solution for me and for others comes from a spiritual path.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and a lot of work. But on the non-addictive side, we tend to think that it's about desire, and like you just don't love it enough. You don't want to put it down enough. But nobody wants to destroy their lives. Nobody wants to lose their family and burn all these bridges. That's not it. There is that medical thing. There is that spiritual thing that needs fixing, that needs filling, whatever that thing is. And it's really easy to say, you just white knuckle it and you hang on and you get past it. And for some people that has worked. Billy Graham did amazing things during the 1900s. That guy was curing people left and right, revivals. And they would be like, Billy Graham saved my life. I mean, how many times did people say that in the 1900s? Tons and tons and tons of people. There's a lot of ways to do this, but you're right. You have to find your path. And if it's that has that spiritual thing, whether it's through 12 steps or something else, Billy Graham, you should go find that. You should go find that thing. Right. And then just keep after it and keep after it. One thing I do know is as you reduce your access to these things and you get your 2007 moment, you put it away and you find the problems that are in your life, boy, they go away. There's a lot less problems. At least you're not the ones that you manufacture yourselves. You still have life problems, but man, you realize the stupid things that you are putting yourself through because of the access to stupid things that you create when you have too many drugs and alcohol in your life.
In 2007, October, I was living in this flophouse hotel room. There was a little sink in the corner where I would ash my cigarettes, where I would wash my clothes, and where I would urinate. I owned almost nothing except for the clothes on my back. I had this filthy black baseball jacket, filthy black Ben Davis slacks, tattered canvas Converse shoes held together with duct tape. And my other outfit was this tuxedo. I had this ridiculous, my evening attire, because I'd worked at the strip clubs. They had given me a good chance, the strip clubs. They had given me a chance to turn my life around, but I burned them like I'd burned almost everyone else in my life. I was cheating. I would get food stamps. I would take the food stamps to the supermarket and buy steaks, and then take the steaks to my drug dealer and trade the steaks for meth. I toted a loaded .357 pistol almost everywhere I went. Not in 2007, because they had long since rightfully confiscated it from me, they being the police. And I believed, again, in these FBI conspiracies. And I blamed everything on, not everything, but I blamed most things on the FBI, because they were after me and they had architected this in my mind, they had architected this vast 9/11 conspiracy against me. That was my life in 2007. We go on and on and on with where my poor choices got me in 2007. In 2019, May, I was in an auditorium at the FBI headquarters. My name was called over the loudspeaker. I took the stage, auditorium, FBI headquarters. I shook hands with the director of the FBI, Christopher Wray. He recognized me with the Community Service Award. It's an incredible honor. I was one of 57 Americans to be recognized by the FBI Director, Christopher Wray, with his Community Service Award. And it was for my work to reduce recidivism and addiction in the San Francisco Bay Area. And none of this, Pete, or at least a very small part, I feel, is due to I worked very hard. I worked incredibly hard. Right. But in order to work hard, I found one needs inspiration. So my inspiration came from that spiritual path, which when I followed that path manifested in remarkable people who came along to help me. People in the FBI, people in police departments, especially incarcerated people and their supporters, people who provide opportunities to the incarcerated, people such as yourself who put these issues at the forefront. If I can turn my life around, if I can come from that place in 2007, flophouse hotel, urinating in the sink, food stamps. If I can come from that place, and all of it blamed on the FBI in my mind, the FBI in my mind was behind all of it. If I can come from that place to being recognized, thanks to the FBI, thanks to many others, by the director of the Bureau, then many things in our society are possible. I had it easy in a lot of ways. It was very difficult. I think the thing I'm most proud of is my thoughts. My thoughts today truly are tuned towards compassion, towards forgiveness, towards goodwill for others. I'm not perfect, nowhere near it. But for 17 years since 2007, I learned very early on to do the right things, to say the right things. I learned to spend my money on plane tickets to travel to Pelican Bay State Prison and pay for an Airbnb and take the coaching courses to help incarcerated people. I truly was dedicated. Yet I remember sitting in Pelican Bay State Prison in an auditorium, my mind filled with resentful, judgmental thoughts.
Sure.
Not towards the incarcerated people so much, but towards my fellow volunteers, because they were expressing themselves and I wanted to express myself and I couldn't. I didn't feel like I could, or just resentments towards my family. Even during those 17 years of being of service, so much of my mind was filled with resentful thoughts and the judgmental thoughts. Yet, like they say in the 12 steps and elsewhere, it's far easier to act ourselves into right thinking than it is to think ourselves into right actions.
Oh boy.
I love that one. I took that to heart. I pursued the right actions as best I could, thanks to help from the FBI and police and incarcerated people and their supporters. And today I'm at a point where I'm far from perfect, but honestly, I wake up every morning.
Same.
My thoughts are of gratitude. My thoughts are of goodwill towards others. My thoughts are of compassion. And in 2007 and the years leading up to that, and even in many years since, that was nowhere near my life. And I've learned that the thought life, for me, the thought life is the most important life. That's where the spiritual path got me.
Knowing where to maintain your well-being, where that maintenance is, and slowing down and making that a priority. Man, oh man, it's such a big thing. One of the things that Honor Ray said, and like when we all look at like, well, what do I do? How do I help? What do I, because look, we're all precious with our, you must vote. There are so many more things that are way more impactful than voting. Vote all you want. That's adorable. Go do that. But you can really make a difference. And in this case, I would throw it all of us, like what Honor Ray said. He's like, when you take someone young like him who's in a gang area, he had an incredible ability to write poetry and rhyme and become a rapper, and that's proven not because he's still doing it, from the 90s to now, and he's made a lot of money doing it. So he had incredible. So it takes an incredible person, an incredible mentor, and an incredible moment, right? Like you can have the incredible mentor, but if you're not driven incredibly, if you don't have that thing, you don't have to be a rapper, but you have to have like your own motivation to do something, right? And so he said, people told me all the time that I was a great rapper and that I was going somewhere, but I couldn't hear it. Like, I knew it, but I couldn't act upon it, right? Those thoughts you were talking about. So he had this mentor, but he lacked that moment that could trigger all that stuff and make him go down a different path. So he stayed on the one he was on just a little bit too long. Maybe 6 months later, everything changes, right? You have that moment that comes along, but you need like multiple ingredients to get someone to hear, acknowledge, and act differently. And we're not even talking about addiction in this case. We're just talking about gangs and when he ends up in someone's house. So think about that and how you can get involved in someone's life and just say, hey, listen, nobody can make me quit on them today. Boy, that's a mantra that's easy to say and hard to do. Boy, that's easy. Like, hey, I set up an appointment for you to go to your anger management class. You didn't show, and that's all right. We'll set another one up for next week. And just no matter what, I'm going to call. And it's easy to say that, but it's hard to do because charity is hard. Addiction is hard. So that's what I have to say. And I don't want to take too much more time, but I do want to hear your thoughts on that and then cover anything else you want to cover. Obviously, the website, everybody, if you want to go check that out, I'll pull this up and put it up here. Uncarcerated is where the work is at. Let's plug your book as well. Boom. Nope, that's Toastmasters. Here we go. Uncarcerated. There you go. Right there. The link down there. And that's how you find out more about Ed's program and what those guys are doing. Floor is yours, sir.
Oh, thank you. We've said so much, and I think if any of your listeners want to contact me, you can do so through the Uncarcerated website, especially if you have an interest in supporting life transformations of the incarcerated people. There's, I guess, the final thing. I always love to go back to the spiritual path. There's a quote from Lao Tzu. He says, to the mind that is still, the whole universe surrenders. To the mind that is still, the whole universe surrenders. So for what it's worth, I've found the way to a still mind is through those actions that are backed by forgiveness, gratitude, and service to others. Again, Pete, I'm very grateful to you for your work in the Prison Chronicles and elsewhere, and to so many people who've inspired me to support the life transformations of the incarcerated. And again, I'm grateful to the FBI and so many in police and corrections. And I suppose I'm most grateful to incarcerated people themselves for persevering, for turning their lives around, for sharing their stories with me, and for giving me reasons to keep following that spiritual path.
Sweet. I'm going to roll these credits. Stay there and I'll say goodbye to you. Bye, everybody.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much.